طيب بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. Welcome everyone and thank you for attending our second webinar this year. We have a esteemed guest and a moderator, an esteemed moderator also from the ISAPA membership, Professor Iman Zain Al-Abdin. She's a professor of economics and Africana studies at Franklin and Marshall College in Pennsylvania. Prof. Iman has PhD in economics at University of Tennessee, and she is an expert in economic development, post-colonial theory and economies, and political economy of Africa. Prof. Iman, please go ahead.
Thank you, Muntasir. Thank you very much to the Executive Committee for this opportunity to moderate the second webinar in this series. And we are very fortunate today to have with us Dr. Munzoul Assal from the University of Khartoum. We know that things are quite unsettled there, but we are very happy that we were able to have him join us today. Dr. Munzoul has a B.Sc from the University of Khartoum and a PhD from Bergen University in Norway. He's a professor of social anthropology at the universities of Khartoum and Bergen. He was a former director of the Peace Research Institute at the University of Khartoum. He's a former director of the Mamoun Bihari Center for Economic and Social Studies in Africa, and currently the Dean of Scientific Research at the University of Khartoum. Professor Assal is also a member of the Board of Trustees of the Arab Council for Social Sciences. He has a wealth of knowledge, and we are hoping that in this very limited time we have today that we will get as much as we can from his thoughts and contribution. He will speak to us today about the current situation, political situation in the Sudan. So without further ado, Dr. Munzoul, welcome, and I'll leave the floor to you.
Thank you very much, Iman, and thank you very much, Muntasir. I'm very glad that I've seen you today. We met, many years back, and this is a good opportunity to see you again. And thank you for giving me the opportunity to at least say a few things about the current situation in the country. And the way I foresee my contribution is that it's not going to be a long talk. I'll try to keep it as short as possible so that I give enough space for questions or comments, because I look at it as a dialogue rather than a conventional presentation. I put down like 7 talking points, and I thought by structuring my thinking this way, it would be easier for me to chronologically talk about the developments that took us to what we are in today since August 2019. Now, it all, of course, it all happened in August 2019 when the FFC, Forces for Freedom and Change, and the TMC, that's the Transition Military Council, with the mediation of the African Union, signed the so-called Constitutional Declaration that paves the way for the formation of the transitional government, which was headed by Dr. Hamdok. A lot, of course, has been said on that declaration and the negotiations that led to that declaration. People, I think, for the most part, had a very strong reservation against it. They saw it as something that gives legitimacy to the military component, especially after the very sad or terrible crash of the sit-in in Khartoum that took place on June the 3rd. But then there are also those who try to rationalize the declaration on the basis of the fact that the situation then was one of reciprocal weakness. The civilian component, or those who are negotiating with the military, have weaknesses, and the military also had their weaknesses, especially after the massacre that took place in June the 3rd. So what was signed then was the only possible document under the circumstances. And additionally, there are also those who are saying that at that time, we cannot have a complete civilian government. That's not possible. And the choice we had was that either we sign that declaration or give the military the chance to rule for 1 year, as they suggested, and then we go for elections. Now, if that scenario was taken, that is given the military the chance to have their council and then go for elections after 1 year or even 2 for that matter, as happened in 1985, that would be disastrous because the structures, or rather the evil structures of the former regime, would be still intact, and they would get back if there are elections. So if we take this argument, and I think many subscribe to it, the deal that was signed was the only possible deal at that time. Now, the second point is that that deal led to what I call a tumultuous partnership, a very difficult partnership that was permitted by absence of confidence and an active policy of sabotaging the whole transition by the military. Of course, we have seen Prime Minister Hamdok repeatedly saying that this is an exemplar, this is a unique partnership, you know, that the world should take note of. But apparently he was terribly mistaken, because we have seen the result of this partnership. The military were having upper hand, you know, when they are supposed to have very limited and ceremonial powers, as the declaration clearly states. But then they interfere into the executive decisions, and this was very clear when it comes to foreign policy. You know, they were very active, you know, in foreign policy and in shaping the country's, you know, policies and politics. So the deal, although I said it was probably the only possible way at the time, gave the military the upper hand. And I really, and this is my personal position, I don't believe the military alone. I also believe the civilian component, because the cracks that appeared early on within the FFC also gave the military an upper hand in the country's policies and politics. And we all know that the declaration gives the military the right to appoint the Minister of Defense and the Minister of Interior, and it was emphasized that they should be responsible for security matters. And we have seen how security was bad during the past couple of years. People were robbed at daylight, and there are a lot of problems in the different parts of the country. And some people would argue or say that the military was actually, or the security forces were part of this. They deliberately orchestrated this to show that the civilian government fails to deliver, when in fact, this was their responsibility. And this takes me to the third point, which is barricading the port and the complicity of the military. We all saw what was happening in the east, Tariq and his people, closing the port, barricading the road that links Khartoum to Port Sudan, creating a lot of problems, and ironically, even to their own people, because people in the east depend on the port for their livelihoods, and barricading the roads and closing the port affected them. And we saw the response of the military when they were confronted with this. They said that this is a political problem and we cannot intervene as security sector or as military people. They say that this is the responsibility of the civilian component. And we have seen that those who were barricading the port, they lifted that, you know, the thing, and now they are starting to negotiate. But reports are coming out that next Saturday, which would be the 4th of December, that they might go back again to barricading the port. We will have to wait and see. But the point I was trying to make was that part of the policy of sabotaging the civilian government is what was happening in the East with the support of the military, because they condone this, because they actually implicitly they provided support for Tariq and his people. And I am just narrating this just to let you know the build-up to the October 25th coup. Now, my first point relates to the fake failed coup, which took place in September 2020. When I think all of you have followed that. And one of the very surprising things was that the military leaders, the two generals, Burhan and Hemeti, they never publicly condemned the coup. And actually, I said this on Sudan TV, that one of the very strange things about this coup was that the two generals, when they visited the regiment that was accused of orchestrating the coup, and instead of publicly condemning it, they tried to justify why these people attempted to have a coup. And to me, that was quite strange, you know. It doesn't really make sense. And one of the very interesting things to note was that Burhan's reaction to the calls which came out from the jailed Sovereign Council member, Mohammed al-Faqih, who called upon the Sudanese people to protect their government and revolution. He was very angry, and no one as yet was able to understand why Burhan was so angry about that call, if you are against the coup. But to me, that coup was fake. It was orchestrated by the two generals. Again, instead of publicly condemning the coup and blaming those who did it, they tried to blame the civilian component. They were saying that because of the failures of the transitional government, the military is quite frustrated, and that is why they did this coup. That is quite something to me. Now, the fifth point is a consequence of the first one. After the failed coup, Burhan in particular started harassing FFC political parties. The Ummah party, the B.Sc party, the DUP coalition, and then you have the Sudanese Congress Party. He was attacking them, and he was saying that these four bodies or political parties, they monopolize power in the country, they excluded others, and that they are failing the Sudanese people. And that was when the so-called FFC2 took the cue by orchestrating the October 16 march that ended up in staging the palace sit-in. So after the failed coup, the military leaders were quite open in their approach. They attacked FFC, they harassed FFC. And one of the strategies that was followed by Al-Burhan, and obviously his advisors, was that any attack against Al-Burhan has been dubbed as an attack against the Sudan armed forces. Of course, this is untrue, because no one attacks the chairman of the Sudan Air Force or the chairman of the Sudan Marines or whatever. They're attacking Al-Burhan as a political leader because he is the head of the Sudan Sovereign Council, and that's a political position. And I really find it quite strange that there isn't any focus on this very shaky, strategy of Burhan. But now that is something which is forcefully coming out. People were telling me, if you don't want to be attacked, step down. But you cannot play a political role and expect people to keep quiet because you are the chief of the army. So this has been building up, as I said, until we had the October 16th march that was, organized by the so-called FFC2 plus the signatories to the Geneva Peace Agreement, the armed movements or armed groups from Darfur and other places, of course, minus a few of them. And the sit-in was actually a build-up to the October 25th military coup, because it was only 9 days from the sit-in that Al-Burhan staged the coup. And there are a lot of theories about, why this military coup happened. Of course, we have repeatedly heard Al-Burhan and his supporters and Hemeti saying that this wasn't a coup. It was a corrective measure, because for them, the revolution has been derailed. But of course, this is just laughable, because instead of talking about 4 political parties dominating the scene, now we have one dictator that's dominating the scene. So that justification really doesn't have any ground. But let me just try to summarize some of the points that I put down. And for some people, the coup was staged to stall the transition by bringing a less revolutionary and corrupt persons and structures, including former regime functionaries. And we have already seen that Burhan, when he took power through this coup, he dismissed some of people that were appointed by Hamdok, and he brought others who were flagrantly supporting the former regime, in the Sudan TV and radio, in the Sudan News Agency. And just yesterday, Burhan appointed a staunch Islamist as head of Sudan intelligence. And this man, the last position he held was the governor of South Kordofan state, and he was head of the NCP there. And he was, by the way, some people are saying that he was the one who brought the phrase "tabu'ad bas," So that is very clear. And 2, the coup was also staged to stop security sector reform. And of course, this is one of the key things that the transitional government should do. The military leaders, they oppose this for obvious reasons. They would like to safeguard their economic interests, especially those interests of the top brass in the military. They are into all sorts of deals, and I think one of the critical issues was that the committee on dismantling the structure of the former regime put its hand on a lot of documents that would implicate top military leaders, and that was one of the reasons why also Burhan was quite apprehensive about the findings and the implications of this. And a third reason that's also contemplated by people, and I am one of those people, is that by setting the coup, these people were trying to sabotage justice and accountability, especially of the former regime members, because the military is resisting the handing over of Bashir and his people to the ICC. we all know that the cabinet has passed this, and the remaining step was to have this ratified by the two bodies, the cabinet and the sovereign council, when they meet, because they act as legislative body in the absence of the transitional assembly. And that didn't happen because the military has obstructed this by, you know, making all these problems. And at a certain point, they stop the meetings of the sovereign council. You know, they say that if there are, if some people in the sovereign council are not dismissed, we are not going to have any meeting until the coup happened. So avoiding justice is also one of the reasons why the coup was such. And the last point to me is these people want to continue looting the country's resources. We all know that the military, and especially the rapid support forces, are engaged in looting resources, in smuggling gold, and all of this. So when these economic reforms were introduced, when the exchange rate was unified, their companies started to lose, because previously these companies were playing on the huge difference between the official exchange rate and the actual, or the so-called black market exchange rate, which was a real one. And if this continues, then after a while, these companies will be forced out of the market. And to stop this, they will have to do something. And I read a very insightful and interesting article. I think it was written by our friend Bakri Jak Al-Madani, who was talking about what he calls transnational cartels, you know, that go beyond the borders of the country. And we already hear a lot of things about the Russians involved in the smuggling of gold, you know, and all of that. And the final reason for the coup is avoiding to hand over the leadership in the Sovereign Council to the civilian component of the government. And somebody who was part of the negotiations that led to the Constitutional Declaration of August 2019 told me that one of the reasons why it took them so long to arrive at that deal 2 years ago was that the military component was against the idea of handing over the leadership in the Sovereign Council to the civilian component, because their logic was that, I mean, a top military leader cannot accept the fact that he is now a leader and then he will have to relinquish that position to a civilian, and that is unbecoming, you know. So the idea of having a civilian leader in the Sovereign Council wasn't assumable for the military leaders, and that was why one of the reasons. These are some of the things I thought about. Of course, they could be other reasons also, but these are the kind of things I thought about. Now, the final point is on the Burhan Hamdok deal that was signed on November 21st. I'm sure you have been following this. You might have also seen some of the analysis about it, the pros and cons and all of that. I was one of those who were very disappointed about the deal. When I saw Hamdok alone signing the deal, I thought this is disastrous, and I couldn't understand how on earth this can happen, you know. But now Hamdok is back as a prime minister. Whether he would be having all powers to do things, to appoint his government or not, we'll have to wait and see. But as I said, for many people, the deal is disastrous. And one of the very key reasons why I'm saying the deal is disastrous is that, to me, the deal legitimized the military coup. This is very obvious. And one of the very regrettable things or facts was that in one of the very, you know, early clauses in the deal says that on the basis of the decisions of the leader of the Sudan military forces تأسيسا على قرارات القائد العام للجيش. What is this? This is just absurd. So you are giving legitimacy to the coup, and you are alienating the youth, you know, because what the youth are saying is quite different, if not completely opposing what Hamdok is talking about. But again, you know, I gave myself a couple of days just to rethink the whole thing. And my reading was that the both parties, the military and Hamdok in particular, were put under a lot of pressure by the international community, because if you have been following, the international community wanted Hamdok back by all means. They really didn't care about the details, you know. And that was why less than an hour after signing the deal, you know, the usual suspects came out commending the deal, hailing Hamdok and the military, you know, all that sort of, you know, political correctness. So the international community definitely played a role in this deal, because, as I said, they want Hamdok back at whatever cost. They didn't care about the details of the deal, and we will have to wait and see how this deal unfolds. The coming few days would show whether the deal is going to succeed or not. I think I will stop here. I thought this should be enough, and then if there are questions or comments, I would be very happy to respond to them. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Munzoul, for this very, very rich presentation. It's not easy for us academics to comment on events as they are unfolding, right? We don't have enough data, we don't have enough time for reflection, and so I'm really impressed by how you brought all of this together, and certainly the background leading up to the events of October 25th and the deal. So there is a lot there to think about and to discuss. And hopefully in the Q&A, we will be able to pick at different aspects of what you raised. So I'm going to ask everybody, please, to put your questions in the Q&A as quickly as possible, so that we can get through as many as we can now. I have, if I may give myself, you know, the privilege of just making a very brief comment and asking you perhaps to shed more light on it. So I think one thing about the deal, to begin from the very last point that you made, the astonishing thing about it is that everything in it pretty much is unconstitutional, right? Everything that Burhan has been doing since October 25th, all the decisions, all the steps that he followed, don't have constitutional basis anyway. So on the one hand, it is difficult to take the agreement with Hamdok, to take it seriously, but of course we have to, because it is where things are. So one of the points that you made in your presentation, and I do agree with you, because it suggests to me that the civilian component, of course, right? The civilian component has some part of the blame there in terms of reacting to what has happened from the beginning, from the 2019 agreement itself and carrying on. And one of the things that I noticed is that there is typically not enough pressure on the military, on Burhan and Hemeti. Typically, the pressure is on when people go out, right, in protests. The pressure is typically directed towards the civilian component of the government, more so than the military component, actually. So aside from the calls for Burhan to leave and for the military to leave, when it comes to substantive discussions about what's going on, whether it is the agreement or decisions that Burhan made, at least to me, right, looking from the outside, there isn't as much pressure as could be. And the example you gave about the coup, the attempted coup of September, right, that there haven't been really enough comments on the nature of that coup and how Burhan and Hemeti did not really condemn it. So there are instances here and there in which the civilian component typically let them get away with some things, you know, more than they should. And to me, this is a symptom, I think, of that the December Revolution and how we move towards democratic transformation is as a test or challenge to the civilian component, in fact, even more so than the military. And that has to do with how they decide to participate in governance, right, as opposed to protest during the transitional period. I mean, this is really the heart, I think, to me, the most difficult thing that the civilian component needs to figure out. How much to participate in governance, even with this, right, partnership, which they don't like, and how much they see their role as part of the government, right, to move from the point of protest to participating in governance. I wonder if you could shed more light in terms of the civilian components. How do you see their role in trying to maneuver the space between protest and governance at all? It's a broad question, I think, but if you could shed some light on that, that would be great. And then we will go into questions from the audience. Thank you.
Thank you, Iman. These are quite insightful comments. I like them. And your first one on the unconstitutionality, of course, what happened was unconstitutional. And just to give you an anecdotal story, actually it's true. Today, I think the public prosecutor or the court acquitted the chairman of the Zakat chamber, who was sacked by Burhan. And this guy wrote a letter saying that he doesn't recognize al-Burhan because he was appointed by Hamdok. He was arrested and he was charged with very ridiculously strange charges, as you know, that could lead to death penalty. But the public prosecutor said that this man is correct because he was appointed by Hamdok. And since Hamdok is back to his office without his warning before al-Burhan, that means he is a legitimate leader. And so he dismissed the charges. And I think there is a room for courts to do something here. And we also how the court forced the internet providers to get back the lines, you know, after they get order from the military to shut down the internet. So the unconstitutionality of what Burhan done is quite obvious, you know. If we have courageous judges and smart lawyers, I think they would be in a lot of trouble. Even by the emergency laws that they are in, they will be in a lot of troubles. Now, the civilian component, you're absolutely right. You know, problems where I don't blame the military component alone, because the civilian also played a lot of role. Actually, the key role in the havoc that we are in is to be blamed on the civilians because of their rifts, because of their problems, and the frustration they created among the public, because the public is quite frustrated with the performance of the civilian component. We have the key political parties, the Ummah Party, Zabas Party, Sudan Congress, and then the DUP coalition. And they are, you know, always quarreling. They never have their act together. And what made things worse, the walkout of the Sudanese Communist Party from the whole thing. And he started attacking the civilian component for you know, reasons that I really fail to understand, instead of focusing on the military. And also, if you follow the social media, you could see this. Now, What happened after the 26th is a whole lot different story. Because now Hamdok as a PM, he doesn't have a political constituency. And to me, this is quite strange. I don't know how the FFC or the former bodies that are with Hamdok, I don't know what they'll be doing. That is a question that needs to be. To me, what they should do, they lend their support to Hamdok, although we hate this deal, but as you say, this is a de facto government. We have to deal with it. But most importantly, to me, at least the political parties, they have to press for having an election law, having the census, and preparing for the elections. Maybe that is what they should do, because now, as I said, this is a different situation, a situation whereby Hamdok stands as a prime minister, and we will have to wait and see how he's going to pick up his, his cabinet. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you very much. All right, so our first question is from an anonymous attendee, and it is actually about your research. How do you arrange research work, I assume on refugees in the field, probably. I'm not entirely sure. Yes, go ahead.
All right. Surprisingly, I'm leading a research project on South Sudanese refugees in Sudan, Uganda, and Ethiopia. This is a capacity building project that provides a scholarship for MA specialists and postdocs. And we tackle different issues, humanitarian work, laws that govern the refugees in these different countries, challenges facing these refugees in the camps. And we cover this in these 3 countries. We do actual field work because these people, and we know that in Africa or in this part of the world, refugees are incarcerated into specific camps. So you can go and visit them and you can do work among them. It's not like Europe where they call these reception centers. These are open places where everyone can walk out. But in Sudan and in Ethiopia, and to some extent even in Uganda is a little bit open, and actually it was held for its policies on refugees. But in Ethiopia and Sudan, refugees are incarcerated into specific camps that are far from urban areas, close to the border. And the idea was that by having these camps closer to the border, this will make it easy for refugees to get back to their homes when circumstances allow. So studying refugees for us in social sciences isn't a big deal, especially in anthropology and sociology, because we do actual field work. We send the students to the field who stay for months to collect the data, and then they get back with it. But perhaps Muntasir can also answer part of the question.
Muntasir, would you like to add anything to that?
Not really, not at the point now.
All right, sounds good. Okay, question from Bakri Abdelmajid. Without political bodies supporting Hamdok and his undemocratic decision, how will Hamdok survive this weak position in sharing power with the military?
That's a very good but very tough question. I actually ended my comment on Iman's point by precisely asking the same question. Hamdok is now without a political, body to support him because the FFC is now out. But surprisingly, I think a couple of days back, it was reported in the media that 18 members of the FFC visited Hamdok and provided support for the deal. Few hours later, a statement came out saying that those who went do not represent FFC. So you see, Iman, you can see the rift that is still continuing even after the disaster. And that was the thing that gives a lot of people too much pessimism, that these political parties never learn from their mistakes. You had a lot of mistakes during Hamdok's first government. You had a lot of mistakes during Hamdok's second government. Now you are out. and you are still continuing doing the same business, as usual. So, but what Hamdok is going to be doing now, my fear is that without having a political body that support him, I really don't know how he's going to pick up his cabinet. They talk about independent technocratic, candidates, but I don't know how do you select that. Funnily enough, Hemeti was saying yesterday on TV that in choosing his cabinet, Hamdok should consult with tribal leaders. So the worry is that this situation might end up bringing back the NCP people, which already started creeping into the different state institutions. And I think this is a dangerous situation.
Do you see any sign that the political parties and hopefully even the resistance committees are realizing that if they do not take opportunity of participating in the coming cabinet, that it will in fact be filled with NCP characters?
That's precisely what's going to happen. That's what's going to happen. And that was why, I am of the opinion that as bad as it is, I think we have to be realistic, because politics is an act of possibilities. You cannot simply stay in one position all the time. You're not going to gain anything. We have to be pragmatic. Of course, we have to stick to our ideals and all of that. But I think within that, we can do a whole lot more, than simply cursing the civilian government and cursing Hamdok. And one of the very worrying things is that, as you, Iman, precisely said, instead of attacking those who should be attacked, we are now attacking Hamdok. And to me, this is, missing the mark. So a lot is actually needed to be done.
A question from Dr. Fadl, another Fadl. You pointed out to the role of the international community in brokering this deal, which for us here in the US was very obvious. It is also obvious that there are differing views between Congress and the State Department on whether this is a step forward or backward. What should we expect from the main broker, that is the US, in making sure this deal meets its intended goals? In other words, what are measures they should hold the military accountable to?
Thank you, Nada. I think this is a question that is also in the thinking of many Sudanese. The U.S. definitely put a lot of pressure, because I was following the special envoy Fletman and his deputy, our friend Nobs. They were here frequently, many times. And Fletman in particular was quite frustrated, because he thought, or he felt, he was ridiculed by Burhan. Burhan was telling him, we're not going to do anything. And then, when he took his flight, the moment he landed in Doha, on his way back to the States, he learned about the coup. So it was quite insulting for him. And that was why the US was taking a very strong position, I think. And to the extent of sending the Undersecretary of State for Africa. And that was when the US had a very clear message for Al-Burhan. We in Sudan here, leaks come out all the time. Nothing could be, kept secret. So we were led to believe that the US really put a lot of pressure on Al-Burhan. And that was when the military tone changed. From saying Hamdok will never get back, to the point where they said Hamdok must be back. And again, yesterday, Hemeti was quoted in his interview with Al Arabiya TV, saying that if he didn't bring back Hamdok, we will get into sanctions, and we didn't want to get there. Now, how the US would pressure the military to live up to the deal or whatever that is there to allow the civilian government to play its role, I really don't know. Beyond halting the economic support and beyond instructing the US aid to stop all the support that was provided for Sudan, except for humanitarian part. Now, one of the very good and encouraging things that this time the US is going to impose targeted personal sanctions, unlike the former blanket sanctions that affected every Sudanese. And I think this was also one of the things that were quite scary for the military leaders, because if you are targeted personally, then you are done. You know, we all know that if you are targeted personally, then there is no way that you can escape that. And I think this is one way by which the US could really force the military to live up to their pledges, however bad they are.
The next question is from Khalafallah Bushara. As the revolution matures and is about to make real change, there will be attempts to contain the revolution and prevent real change. This happened on April 11, then again on August 17, 2019, after the massive June 30 protest. The split in opinions after August 17 led to a dormant stage. Again, the revolution was maturing after the fake September coup attempt. By October 21st, the streets were unified and continued after October 25th. This is more of a comment, but it's getting to a question in the end. Hamdok's deal was no different, just another attempt to contain the revolution. Our role is to recognize that this time and ignore the deal and any split in opinions completely. Continue the revolution unified. The question is, how can we blame the civilians if we know that the military were never genuine and have always wanted to counter the revolution?
I think your comment is well taken. Your question about blaming the civilians, I think they had a role to play in the bad management of the whole situation. Of course, we recognize the fact that they don't have power. The military has always had an upper hand, but still, I think the civilian component could have done better. And I am here specifically referring to the wrangling and quarrels between the different components of the civilian government. The political parties never agree on a single thing. They failed to restructure the FFC. They failed on a lot of grounds. They failed to form the transitional assembly. This is their number one responsibility. This is not a military thing. If they picked up the members, the military would have been forced to allow the assembly to be formed, but they didn't do that. So we're not blaming the civilian component just out of the blue. They have a lot of issues to deal with. They have to acknowledge that they did badly on a lot of files, and they could have done better, and that was why. But I could see your reasoning for that. Of course, as I said, we should not miss the mark. The militaries actually should be our target. Of course, we will criticize the civilian, but now that they're out, I don't know who are going to criticize. I think it's only Hamdok that's going to bear the responsibility.
Our next question from Abdulrahim Hamad. There are rumors that US has appointed an ambassador to Sudan. Is that true? And a follow-up question from him too. Also, I wonder what will happen to Sudanese ambassadors, including Ambassador Nuruddin Sati here in DC, who was fired by Burhan during the beginning days of the coup. I don't know if you can answer these questions, but go ahead.
For the first question, I also read that in social media, but I thought you are in the US and you should know better than us here. But I think that is true. Of course, it will have to be confirmed. But I saw this in a lot of channels, so we just have to wait and see. On the second question on the ambassadors that were fired, I think the story that I just related could open an opportunity, because what Burhan did is unconstitutional. There's no question about that. And believe it or not, with all the havoc that happened in the past 30 years, the judiciary in Sudan is still to some extent intact. If you have a courageous judge and smart lawyers, I think all the decisions that were taken by Burhan would be dismissed, especially with regard to the civil service, because he dismissed people as chairman of the Sudan Armed Forces. Now, what has the civil service got to do with the chairman of Sudan Armed Forces? It doesn't make any sense. And a lot of people actually start to challenge the decisions of the dismissal. So, but again, we will have to wait and see to what extent is Hamdok willing and able to address some of these issues and challenges.
The next question is from Muntasir. Muntasir, go ahead.
Thank you. So it's more of a rhetoric question, but also wanted to get some verification and your thoughts on it. I have a feeling that all those things that are happening are about wasting time of the Sudanese people and their emotions and their thinking rather than anything else. And it makes me wonder, you know, like who is behind that? So the two thoughts that come to mind, and I wanted your reflection on them, is first one, maybe another nation that would like us not to start the cycle of production, because if we start, then they lose something, and they want us to keep, you know, quarreling and circling around. And another thought that maybe it's a certain party that would want to get ready for the elections while we are busy arguing and getting, you know, distressed about other things until the time is here and nobody is ready for it. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, thank you, Muntasir. Now you reminded me our discussions
Long time ago.
in Sudan Net, you know, 20 years back. You know, I think you are right. And these are the kind of issues I haven't touched on my presentation. If you follow the social media, the Sudanese people are quite angry and frustrated from 3 countries: Egypt, UAE, and Saudi Arabia. I really don't know the motives of Saudi Arabia and UAE, although UAE has, you know, is playing a very strange and destructive role, I can say, around the world, you know, in Somalia, in Djibouti, in Eritrea, and Ethiopia. But Egypt has historically been quite undermining when it comes to Sudanese politics. There is no question about that. For political reasons and for economic reasons. Egypt has been benefiting from the economic sanctions that Sudan were under for the past 3 decades. The Sudanese export goes through Egypt, and regrettably, some of our products were rebranded as Egyptian products. This is also true. No one can argue with that. And it's in their interest that the country remains where it is. That is why there is a very strong sentiment against the Egyptians. And I think there is a good reason for that. So that is one thing. And your other point relates to a broader point I would like to make, but that one of the objectives and if I may say even the dreams of the Sudanese people, that we break away from the evil cycle of the post-colonial Sudanese state that failed for the past 60 years. When the revolution happened, people were euphoric, people were happy that finally we could get away from the failure of our political systems. Unfortunately, as things unfold, this is going to be a long process and is yet to be the case. You know, people are, you know, the military and those, if I may even say that, the cartels, you know, they could be Islamists, they could be communists, they could be Ansar Sunnah, but it's in their interest to keep things the way they are, you know. This might be a hidden thing that's not readily visible, but I am one of the believers in it, that there are still forces that want to hold the country back. So that is what that's my response to you.
Thank you very much. Back to you, Iman.
Thank you. Next question from Bakri, and this is a very pressing subject here. Can you shed some light on what happened in Jabal Moon?
That's very tragic, and I was on TV 2 days ago, specifically on this issue of Jabal Moon, and with me were two rebel leaders, those who signed the Juba peace agreement. We talked about this, and it was tragic, it is sad, and my response to, and actually the governor of Darfur was also with us, my response was that this is something that is repeatedly happening. It happens in the same way, perhaps by the same people. We have never seen any proceedings. You know, investigation committees are formed and formed. None of these committees make their reports public. We don't know what happens. And at this point, I also said it publicly, that I was here on TV 2 months back when the same thing happened in a place called Kolge in North Darfur, where people were killed. And a high-level committee was mentioned, headed by one of the Sovereign Council members and the brother of Hemeti. They went there and nothing happened. So this is something that is very sad. It's happening all the time, the same way, perhaps by the same people. And one of the reasons why this is repeatedly happening is that agreements are not implemented the way they should be implemented. The security arrangements have not been even started for the peace agreement, you know, and the rebel leaders, instead of going to Darfur, to the people, talking to them, explaining the peace agreement to them, they are here in Khartoum, doing some silly things, organizing sit-ins in the palace. Jibril and I mean now in particular, actually I wrote a lot on this, that instead of attending to the actual things they should attend to, they are obstructing the transition and they are participating in sabotaging the transition. And this is really very sad that they are doing everything except what they should do, what they should be doing. And that is why we see these tragic accidents recurring all the time. This is the third time in this year that we have a situation whereby hundreds of people are killed or injured. The first one was in January in Guinea. The second one was in April in Guinea. And we have this third one in Jabal Moon. And before that, I think 2 months ago, we had the one in Kolge in North Darfur state.
There is a question that relates to this one here. What is the impact of the deal on what is called the Juba Peace Deal players and their role during the post-Hamdok Burhan deal? So it relates to what you just talked about here, if you could.
This is a very interesting question. And I think it's going to be a test case for the so-called independent technocratic cabinet, because the Juba deal, you know, provided positions in the cabinet. I think 9 positions were given to those who came with the Juba agreement, plus the 3 sovereign council seats. We have Malik Agar, we have Al-Hadi Idris, and we have something Hajar, you know, plus the ministers. And one of the ministers is Jibril, of course, the Minister of Finance. And we have Mini Minawi, who is the General Governor of Darfur. I really hope that the 2 key figures, Minawi and Jibril, would be out. If I were Hamdok, I would tell them I don't mind to have the signatories of the peace agreement having positions as per the terms of the agreement, but not these 2 persons. You can nominate anyone else, because I don't see Jibril and Hamdok see eye to eye after what happened. You have a Minister of Finance who is part of sabotaging the government, and you bring him again in the cabinet. This doesn't really make any sense. I don't know how Hamdok is going to do about that. He indirectly said on TV that the Yuba partners have positions as the sovereign council, which means that he might have other thoughts about how their participation in the cabinet would be. But that is also something that we can only wait and see what's going to be the position of Hamdok on that. Because if we are talking about independent technocratic cabinet members, then this would exclude, you know, those signatories to the European peace agreement.
That question was from Abdurrahman Shuaib, I believe. Sorry, I missed to mention the name. The next question is from Nada Fadl. As a follow-up to US measures, the deal gives the military the upper hand and lacks timelines. So it looks like they can easily circumvent any measures based on this weak agreement. What do you suggest should be the indicators they should use in identifying that the deal has failed? By they, I mean, I suppose the US.
Up to now, the very fact that they didn't release all the prisoners is, to me, one very clear indicator about the troubles the deal has already started to face. The military, I don't trust the military at all. Never. And as you rightly mentioned, there is no timeline. There are no clear, you know, milestones. We're talking about 1 year and a half, and we will be having elections. I really fail to see how that can happen. Because if you want to have a credible and transparent election, first you have to have a census. Because the last census we have had was in 2008. You know, you have to clear the voter registration files. The NCP has done a lot of damage and corruption there. 3, you have to amend the election law, you know, because the election law was done under the NCP and they did it in a way that would guarantee their win. So these are 3 key major things, and I really fail to see how they could be done in 1 year and a half. And what makes things even worse, as you rightly said, was that there is no timeline. So we don't know how these things would be done. But the failure of the deal would be very clear in a few weeks. You know, the prisoners, and then how Hamdok appoints the cabinet, and all of that. We'll see this quite soon, actually. I hope so.
There is a follow-up comment about Jabal Moon from Abdurrahim Hamid. I heard the reason behind the attack at Jabal Moon is to clear the area from local population, I think, because Jabal Moon is rich in precious metals.
I think, Abdurrahim, that is a possibility, of course. You know, the problem is when these things happen, the government forms investigation committees, but then we never know what the outcome of those, you know, of the work of the committees. We really don't know. Now, when I was on TV 2 days back, they brought a report before we started debating the issue, and a senior official in West Darfur State squarely accused the rapid support forces that they were part of the massacre. And when the presenter, which was very courageous and smart young man, cornered the governor of Darfur, Mohammed Isa Ilew, the governor, you know, the guy freaked out, and he said that either the guy is lying or either he's telling the truth. And in both cases, we formed a committee and we will get to the bottom of it. And my reaction to that was that you have been forming a lot of committees. We have never seen anything. So I don't expect to see anything coming out of this investigation committee. And for this reason, we really don't know whether, as Abdurrahim was saying, that this was intentionally done to clear the area because the area is quite rich in different minerals.
I have one last question for you, Munzoul, if I may, which takes us back to the civilian component. And we've talked about it so far in general, but I am curious about one aspect of it. In the agreement, in the deal between Hamdok and Burhan, there is one aspect, or one of the 4 reasons Hamdok said he signed the agreement was to broaden participation. And there are a whole set of different groups mentioned there. You mentioned al-Idara al-Ahliya, and there is Qita' al-Shabab or Qita' al-Nisa, the so-called Qita' al-Nisa. And if there is any kind of positive, right, thing that comes out of that, do you think women's groups particularly, right? Do you think women's groups are there any efforts that you've seen or you have reason to believe that women's groups will try to take advantage of that to be a part of the coming administration, whatever it is, because their representation in the transitional government was so pitiful? The only word that I can use is pitiful. The gap between women's participation in the revolution and the way they were treated in the composition of the transitional government was really completely unacceptable. So do you think that women's groups, I know of Mensam and several others, do you have any knowledge about how they're thinking about how to go forward in this coming phase?
For now, I don't. But I think how these women groups will engage and take advantage of this deal, if at all, would depend on the behavior of the Prime Minister in the coming few days. Because as we speak, there is a rampant frustration, about the deal. People were angry, people were quite frustrated, and they were saying that maybe we should give Hamdok the benefit of the doubt. Maybe we should wait and see how he behaves, how he chooses his cabinet, and how is he going to respond to the decisions that were taken by Burhan. This is one thing. I think this will affect the behavior of those. Now, going back to the clause that says that youth, Turk Sufia, women groups, tribal, this is quite ambiguous and to me very unclear, because I don't understand the mechanism through which these people could be consulted. With women groups like Mansam, that might be a bit easy, but how on earth can you consult the Shabab or the youth? I see that the resistance committees are really working hard to, build structures from the bottom. They started this process, and maybe that would allow them to have a sort of leadership that can be, engaged in the coming few days. But generally, to me, talking about broadening the base by including, Sufi Turks, tribal leaders, the youth, women, and whatnot. This is again istihbal siyasi, as the NCP used to, this kind of talk. But we will have to wait and see the behavior of the PM, and perhaps in a couple of weeks we should know definitively how this deal is going to continue, because we don't have time. Time is running quite fast. They're talking about July 2023, which is around the corner. So we just have to keep an eye on things as they happen.
We have 2 more questions that we will take, and then probably we'll conclude after that. Anonymous, many believe that the purpose of the deal is to divide people into those who support Hamdok and those who are against. What is your advice to resistance committees and activists outside of Sudan about how to make sure they are not divided by this deal? Good question.
I think the resistance committees already made up their minds. They say that we're not concerned about Hamdok. We behave like he doesn't exist, and we do our job, you know. And some also said explicitly, let Hamdok do his job, and we'll do our job. And I think this is, to me, is a very good strategy. And instead of, you know, entrenching divisions, you know, among the people, they should focus on what the military is doing, you know. And I think if this happens, then we can take advantage of this deal, however bad it is. And this, I think, also should apply to people who are abroad. I think their engagement is quite critical.
Okay. The final question is from Bakri. What is your reading of the street and its continuous escalation of the protests? How could this result in a real change?
This is a good question, but it's quite difficult also. Now, one of the good things after Hamdok's back was that we have seen the November 25th marches. Luckily, there were no fatalities, and that's something good, which means that people have the right to demonstrate. They have the right to be protected while they're demonstrating, because these are peaceful demonstrations. Now, whether such demonstrations would lead to political change or not, that is a question that I cannot answer. Because the military, whether we like it or not, has an upper hand. They have guns. They could do a lot of harm. And we may not be able to change, at least in the very near future. If this continues like a monthly demonstration or so until the end of the transition or when the elections come, then that would definitely make a change, even though it's in the long run. And I see this as a buildup of a strong civil movement that calls for democratization, that calls for rights, you know, to be attained in the country in the long run. And I think the run up to the election, from now until such a time of elections, if at all, my hope is that these demonstrations continue in a peaceful manner, and that there are no fatalities, and that people will have the right to say what they want to say. If this happens, then I think we are in the right track, because eventually we will get there.
All right, I think we've come to the end of this presentation here. Thank you very much again, Munzoul, for this very, very informative and insightful presentation, very helpful. And I'm sure the discussion and conversation will continue in other forums. I will give it back to Muntasir now.
Thank you very much, Iman. Beautiful moderation, very engaging discussion. Thank you very much, Munzoul. It's always great to have a beautiful mind with us and have that discussion going. We can't thank you enough. We will continue this webinar series, inshallah, and let's hope all for a democratic and beautiful country that we will have in the near future. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much, Muntasir and Iman, for making this possible, and I'm glad to have seen you after a very long time.
Thank you, everyone. Goodbye.